The stop that shook everything. Angela Rivers had always been a person of quiet confidence. A dedicated social worker, she spent her days advocating for underprivileged families and her evenings supporting community initiatives. Tonight was one of those evenings, a fundraiser gala at a downtown hotel in Kansas City to support after-school programs for at-risk youth. The glittering event had been a success, raising funds and awareness for a cause close to her heart. Dressed in an elegant emerald green gown that shimmered softly under the city lights, Angela felt a sense of accomplishment as she navigated her silver hybrid through the quiet suburban streets toward home. The city was serene at night. Angela enjoyed the stillness, the occasional chirp of crickets blending with the gentle hum of her car. Her husband, David Rivers, had sent her a text earlier. "Drive safe. See you soon." A former Marine turned chief of police, David was her rock, always encouraging her to pursue her passion for justice and fairness. Tonight, she looked forward to sharing the success of the fundraiser with him over a late-night cup of tea. Just as Angela turned onto a dimly lit stretch of road, the sharp glare of flashing red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. Startled, she slowed and pulled to the side of the road. The police cruiser behind her came to a stop, and another patrol car soon followed, parking a few feet back. The situation felt excessive, but Angela pushed the thought aside. She knew the importance of cooperating with law enforcement. David's words of advice echoed in her mind. Stay calm, comply, and always be respectful. Rolling down her window, she waited for the officer to approach. A tall, imposing man with a stern demeanor stepped out of the first vehicle and approached her car. His face was shadowed by the harsh glare of the headlights. "License and registration," he demanded curtly, without so much as a greeting. "Of course, officer," Angela replied evenly, reaching for her documents. "May I ask what I've done to warrant being stopped?" The officer took her license and registration without answering her question. He studied the documents for a moment before responding. "We received a report about a vehicle matching this description, involved in suspicious activity in the area." Angela frowned, puzzled. "Suspicious activity? I just left a fundraiser downtown." "I'm not sure what you mean." "Step out of the car, ma'am," the officer ordered, his voice growing more authoritative. "Excuse me." Angela's calm facade faltered. "I don't understand why this is necessary. Have I done something wrong?" "Step out of the car now," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Angela hesitated, her heart beginning to race. She glanced at the other officers who had now exited their vehicles. One approached her passenger side window, shining a flashlight inside. The scene felt surreal. She had done nothing wrong, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Taking a deep breath, Angela unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the car door. She stepped out slowly, keeping her hands visible. "I'm complying," she said firmly, "but I'd appreciate it if you could explain why I'm being treated like a suspect." Her composed demeanor seemed to irritate the officers. One of them moved past her and began rummaging through her car without asking permission. He opened the glove compartment, flipped through her papers, and then turned his attention to the trunk. "Hey," Angela protested, her voice rising slightly. "You can't search my car without my consent or a warrant." The officer ignored her. The younger one, who appeared less certain, tried to justify their actions. "We're just following up on a report, ma'am." Angela's patience wore thin. "And that report gives you the right to violate my privacy?" "I don't think so." The lead officer, clearly annoyed, snapped, "We're doing our job. If you've got nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." Angela's jaw tightened. The insinuation stung. Before she could respond, the second officer emerged from the trunk holding a stack of colorful brochures from the fundraiser. "What's all this?" he asked, flipping through them with mock scrutiny. "They're for the fundraiser I just left," Angela replied sharply. "I've already explained that." The officer tossed the stack back into the trunk carelessly. Angela fought to maintain her composure, but humiliation burned in her chest. She felt like a criminal, standing there under the glare of the police lights, her evening's achievements reduced to nothing. "I'd like to call my husband now," she said, pulling her phone from the passenger seat. "No sudden movements," the lead officer warned as if she were a threat. Angela ignored the condescension and dialed David's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Angela, are you okay?" His voice was filled with concern. "No, I'm not," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been pulled over, and they're searching my car without cause. Can you come here?" "Where are you?" David's tone shifted to one of quiet fury. She gave him her location and added, "Please hurry." "I'm on my way," he said firmly. As Angela ended the call, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. They couldn't hear the conversation, but her calm confidence clearly unsettled them. The lead officer sneered. "Who'd you call? Your lawyer?" "My husband," Angela replied simply, her eyes locking with his. "And I assure you, this isn't going to end the way you think." Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Angela stood silently, her back straight, refusing to show the fear creeping into her heart. The officers continued their search, clearly frustrated by the lack of evidence to justify their actions. When the faint roar of an engine grew louder in the distance, Angela felt a flicker of hope. A sleek black SUV appeared, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It came to a stop behind the second patrol car, and the driver's door opened. David stepped out, his tall frame exuding authority. Dressed in a tailored suit with his badge prominently displayed on his belt, he moved with the controlled precision of someone used to commanding a room. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with quiet fury as he took in the scene before him. The officers stiffened as he approached. Angela felt a rush of relief as her husband's steady presence filled the tense air. David's voice was calm but firm as he addressed the lead officer. "Good evening. I'm Chief David Rivers of the Kansas City Police Department. Would you like to explain why my wife is being detained and her car searched without a warrant?" The officer's face paled slightly. "Sir, we were investigating a report of suspicious activity." David raised a hand, cutting him off. "Suspicious activity involving a well-dressed woman driving home from a charity event. I'm going to need more than that." The officers exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had made a grave mistake. David's presence had shifted the dynamic, and they knew there was no escaping accountability. What unfolded next would set the stage for a confrontation that would challenge not only their actions, but the integrity of the system itself. A catalyst for justice. Angela Rivers stood beside her car, the cool night air doing little to soothe the fire in her chest. Though relieved by her husband's arrival, the events leading up to this moment replayed in her mind like a bad dream. The humiliation, the condescension, and the blatant disregard for her dignity had shaken her to the core. She watched as David's composed but steely demeanor sent ripples of unease through the officers standing before him. David Rivers was not a man to be underestimated. His years in the Marines had honed his ability to remain calm under pressure, and his time as chief of police had taught him how to navigate delicate but charged situations. But tonight wasn't about professionalism. It was personal. The sight of his wife, a strong and accomplished woman, being treated like a suspect for no apparent reason, had ignited a storm within him. "Let's start with names," David said, his tone sharp yet controlled. His piercing gaze swept over the group of officers. "Who's in charge here?" The lead officer stepped forward reluctantly. "I am, sir. Sergeant Robert Hensley." David nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Hensley, explain to me, in detail, what led to this stop and subsequent search." Hensley shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his fellow officers as if searching for support. "We received a report about a car matching this description being involved in suspicious activity in the area," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it had held earlier. David folded his arms, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Suspicious activity. That's a broad term. What exactly did this report entail?" And why did you feel it necessary to search my wife's vehicle without her consent or a warrant? Hensley hesitated, his face betraying his discomfort. We believe there might be evidence related to the report in the vehicle. We acted within our authority. Within your authority. David's voice rose slightly, his composure unwavering. The Constitution of this country says otherwise. You had no probable cause, no evidence, and no consent. Do you even understand the legal ramifications of your actions? The younger officer, clearly out of his depth, fidgeted nervously. Angela, standing a few feet away, observed the scene silently. She knew David well enough to recognize the subtle signs of his anger. A tightened jaw, clipped words, and the way his hands occasionally clenched at his sides. She also knew he wouldn't let this slide. David took a step closer to the group, his voice growing colder. Not only did you violate my wife's rights, but you also humiliated her in the process. Do you realize the gravity of what you've done? Or are you so used to operating without accountability that it doesn't even register anymore? The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The youngest among them opened his mouth as if to speak, but a sharp look from Hensley silenced him. The tension was palpable, the weight of David's words hanging heavily in the air. Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention. 2 more police cruisers pulled up, followed by an unmarked car. Out stepped Captain Eleanor Trask, a seasoned officer with a reputation for being fair but firm. Her presence was commanding, and her sharp eyes immediately took in the situation. "Chief Rivers," she said, her voice measured as she approached. "I was informed of a situation involving your wife. I apologize for the delay." David turned to her, his tone cool but respectful. "Captain Trask, your officers have crossed every conceivable line tonight. I expect a full explanation." Trask's gaze shifted to Hensley. "Sergeant, brief me." Hensley stiffened, launching into a rehearsed explanation of the events. As he spoke, Angela noted how his words were carefully chosen, designed to minimize the severity of their actions. It was clear he was trying to save face. When he finished, Trask's expression hardened. "Sergeant, let me make this clear. Acting on a vague report does not give you carte blanche to violate protocol or a citizen's rights. You've put this department in a compromising position. And worse, you've undermined the trust we're supposed to uphold." David stepped forward. "Captain, this isn't just about protocol. It's about systemic issues within your department. If this can happen to my wife, a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record, imagine what's happening to those without the privilege of resources or connections." Trask nodded, her expression grim. "You're right, Chief. This incident highlights deeper problems that can't be ignored. I assure you, there will be a thorough investigation." David's lips pressed into a thin line. "An investigation is the bare minimum. I want disciplinary action, retraining, and reforms. This department needs to be held accountable." The gathered crowd of bystanders murmured in agreement, their phones capturing every word. Angela's gaze swept over the faces in the crowd, some angry, some supportive, and others simply curious. She realized then that this was no longer just about her. This was about standing up for everyone who had ever been wronged by an unchecked system. Angela took a step forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I appreciate the promises, Captain Trask, but promises don't change lives. Actions do. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who has been treated unfairly and didn't have the chance to speak up." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices mingling with calls for justice. Trask raised her hands for silence, her expression resolute. "Mrs. Rivers, you have my word. We'll address this." Angela held her gaze. "I'll hold you to it." As the officers began to disperse, Angela felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over her. David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his steady presence grounding her. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "We're going to make sure this never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone." Angela nodded, her resolve hardening. She had spent her life fighting for others, But tonight she had become part of the fight herself. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she knew she wasn't alone. As the night stretched on, and the flashing lights faded into the distance, Angela and David stood together, a united front against injustice. This moment would become a catalyst for something much larger than either of them could have anticipated, a movement that would challenge the very foundation of a flawed system and demand change. The ripples begin. By the time Angela and David Rivers returned home that night, the weight of the evening hung heavy in the air. Their usually cozy suburban home felt different, its warmth dulled by the stark reality of the events they had just endured. Angela slipped out of her evening gown, her hands trembling slightly as she hung it in the closet. The sequins sparkled faintly under the light, but the sight of it only reminded her of how a celebratory night had turned into an ordeal she would never forget. David was in the living room, pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. Angela could hear his low, measured voice as he spoke to someone, likely another senior member of the department. His tone was calm but laced with steel, a sure sign that he was already setting things into motion. She sat on the edge of their bed, staring at her phone. Social media notifications flooded her screen. Videos of the incident had already gone viral, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForAngela and #PoliceAccountability. Comments ranged from outrage at the officer's behavior to calls for systemic change. The sheer volume of attention was overwhelming, and Angela felt a pang of unease. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Her thoughts were interrupted by David entering the room. He looked at her, his expression softening. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. Angela nodded slowly. "I think so. It's just a lot. I didn't expect it to escalate like this." David placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You handled yourself with grace. I'm proud of you." She managed a small smile. "I'm proud of you, too. You didn't just show up for me tonight. You stood up for something bigger." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is just the beginning, Angela. The videos are everywhere. The department is already under scrutiny. We're going to face backlash. From the officers, from people resistant to change, maybe even from higher-ups." Angela's grip on his hand tightened. "Good. Let them push back. It's about time someone did something about this." David nodded, his expression resolute. "You're right. But we need to be strategic. This can't just be about anger. It has to be about action." The next morning, the full extent of the fallout became clear. News outlets had picked up the story, airing clips of the confrontation alongside commentary from legal analysts, activists, and law enforcement officials. Angela and David's names were on every channel, their actions the subject of heated debates. Angela's phone rang incessantly, friends, family, and even strangers calling to offer their support. One call, however, stood out. It was from a woman named Carla Diaz, a community organizer Angela had met through her social work. "Angela," Carla began, her voice urgent, "I saw what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Angela replied, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "Just trying to process everything." Carla's tone softened. "I'm glad you're safe. Listen, I don't want to add to your stress, but this moment, it's powerful. People are talking about you, about David, about what this means. I think we can use this to create real change." Angela frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Carla hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You've always been a voice for the community, Angela. But now, you're more than that. You're a symbol. People are rallying behind you. This is an opportunity to push for reform, to hold the police accountable in ways that haven't been done before." Angela considered Carla's words. The idea of becoming a public figure in this fight was daunting, but she couldn't deny the truth in what Carla was saying. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been mistreated, overlooked, or silenced. "I'll think about it," Angela said finally, "but I'm not sure where to start." "Start with your story," Carla urged. "People need to hear it from you. Let them see your humanity, your strength. The rest will follow. Meanwhile, at the Kansas City Police Department, tensions were running high. Captain Eleanor Trask had called an emergency meeting with her senior officers, including Sergeant Hensley and the other officers involved in the incident. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with unease as Trask entered, a stack of papers in hand. "Let's get straight to the point," Trask said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The department is under fire, and it's because of your actions." Hensley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "With all due respect, Captain, we were just following protocol." "Don't," Trask interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Don't insult my intelligence with that excuse. What you did wasn't protocol. It was negligence. And now, the entire department is paying the price." One of the younger officers, clearly nervous, spoke up. "Captain, we didn't know she was the chief's wife. If we had—" "Again, don't." Trask snapped. "It shouldn't matter who she is. Every citizen deserves respect, and you failed to provide it. The fact that she's married to Chief Rivers only amplifies how badly you misjudged the situation." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Trask took a deep breath before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen. There will be an internal investigation, and you will cooperate fully. In the meantime, you're all on administrative leave. If you think this will blow over, think again. The world is watching, and so am I." Hensley opened his mouth to protest, but quickly closed it when Trask's glare landed on him. The message was clear. There would be no leniency. By midday, Angela and David found themselves at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside their home, and the phone didn't stop ringing. Despite the chaos, Angela felt a sense of clarity. Carla's words had resonated with her, and she realized she couldn't stay silent. She and David sat together in their living room, drafting a statement. Angela insisted on writing it herself, wanting every word to reflect her truth. When she finished, David read it over, nodding in approval. "That's perfect," he said. "You're speaking from the heart, and that's what people need to hear." Angela took a deep breath before nodding. "Let's do it." They decided to release the statement through a press conference later that afternoon. As they prepared, Angela felt a mix of nerves and determination. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but she knew this was bigger than her comfort zone. When the time came, they stood side by side at the podium, a sea of reporters and cameras before them. Angela's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but when she began to speak, her voice was steady. "My name is Angela Rivers," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Last night, I experienced something no one should ever have to endure. I was treated as a suspect, not a person. I was humiliated, not because of anything I did, but because of assumptions made about me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But this isn't just about me. It's about every person who has faced injustice and had no one to speak for them. It's about a system that needs to change." As Angela continued, her voice grew stronger. She spoke of the importance of accountability, fairness, and respect. She called for reforms in policing practices and urged the public to demand better from their leaders. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Angela stepped back, David placing a reassuring hand on her back. She had taken the first step, and though the road ahead would be long, she felt ready to face it. That night, as Angela and David sat together on their porch, watching the stars, Angela felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt since the incident. She leaned her head on David's shoulder, her voice soft. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" David nodded, his arm wrapping around her. "Yes, but we'll face it together." And with that, Angela knew they were ready for whatever came next. Together, they would turn this moment of injustice into a movement for change. The storm gathers momentum. Angela Rivers awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The light of the early morning sun barely filtered through the curtains, But already the day seemed to be pulling her in a dozen directions. She rubbed her eyes and reached for the phone, squinting at the screen. Missed calls, texts, emails. The fallout from the previous night was gaining momentum. David was already up, standing by the window, his posture rigid as he spoke into his phone. His voice was calm but tinged with a weariness Angela hadn't heard in years. "No, we're not making any statements until we've reviewed the department's response," he said firmly. "This isn't about damage control. It's about accountability." Angela slid out of bed, pulling a robe around herself, and padded toward him. He glanced at her and gave her a small, reassuring smile before ending the call. "Busy morning?" she asked softly. "Understatement of the year," David replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "The department's PR team is scrambling. Half of them want to distance themselves from the incident, and the other half is looking for ways to spin it. But I'm not letting this get buried." Angela nodded, appreciating his resolve. "It's bigger than us now, isn't it?" "It is," David admitted. "The department's integrity is on the line, and so is ours. But more than that, this is an opportunity to bring real change. The question is, how do we move forward?" Angela thought for a moment before replying. "We start by staying true to our values. This isn't just about calling out the problem. It's about showing people there's a better way." David looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You're right. We'll tackle this together, step by step." By mid-morning, Angela and David were sitting at their dining table, joined by Carla Diaz, the community organizer who had reached out to Angela the night before. Carla had brought with her a laptop, stacks of papers, and an infectious energy that filled the room. "This is bigger than I even imagined," Carla began, gesturing to her screen. "The videos from last night have already been viewed millions of times. People are outraged, Angela. They're organizing protests, starting petitions, even reaching out to news outlets demanding answers." Angela leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "That's good, right? People are paying attention." "It's more than good. It's unprecedented," Carla replied. "But it's also volatile. If we don't channel this energy properly, it could fizzle out or worse, turn destructive." David nodded in agreement. "She's right. Anger alone doesn't create change. It has to be paired with strategy and clear goals. Otherwise, it's just noise." Carla grinned. "Exactly. That's why I'm here. Angela, you're the face of this movement now, whether you like it or not. People see you as someone who stood tall in the face of injustice, someone who refused to back down. That's powerful. But we need to figure out what we're asking for, what change we're demanding." Angela took a deep breath, the weight of Carla's words settling on her shoulders. She hadn't asked for this role, but she couldn't deny the importance of what was happening. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's figure it out. What's our first step?" Carla's face lit up. "Glad you asked. I've been talking to other activists and community leaders. We're drafting a list of demands, concrete actions the police department can take to address systemic issues. Things like mandatory de-escalation training, independent oversight committees, and clearer protocols for traffic stops." David raised a hand. "Those are solid ideas, but we need to make sure they're actionable. If we push for too much too fast, we risk losing credibility." "Agreed," Angela said. "Let's focus on the immediate changes that will make the biggest impact. We can build from there." Carla nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she took notes. "Perfect. We'll also need to prepare for the press conference later today. Angela, people are going to ask you tough questions about your experience, about the officers, about what comes next. Are you ready for that?" Angela hesitated. The thought of standing in front of a room full of reporters, cameras pointed at her, was daunting. But she knew she couldn't shy away from this moment. "I'll be ready," she said firmly. That afternoon, Angela and David arrived at City Hall for the press conference. The building's steps were packed with journalists, community members, and activists holding signs with slogans like, accountability now, and justice for all. Angela's heart pounded as she stepped out of the car, but David's steady presence beside her gave her strength. As they made their way to the podium, Angela caught sight of Captain Eleanor Trask standing off to the side. Their eyes met briefly, and Angela saw something unexpected in Trask's expression, an unspoken apology, perhaps even a hint of admiration. The room quieted as Angela approached the microphone. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Angela Rivers. You all know what happened to me 2 nights ago. But I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about what this incident represents: a failure of trust, a failure of respect, and a failure of justice." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I'm also here to talk about hope. Hope that we can take this moment and turn it into a movement for change. Hope that we can build a system where no one has to endure what I did. And hope that together we can create a future where accountability is the norm, not the exception." The crowd erupted into applause, but Angela wasn't finished. "I'm calling on the Kansas City Police Department to lead by example. Implement mandatory de-escalation training. Establish an independent oversight committee. Review and reform traffic stop protocols. These are just the first steps, but they're steps we need to take now." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "This isn't just about one night or one person. It's about a system that needs to change, and it's about all of us demanding that change together." When she stepped back, the applause was deafening. David squeezed her hand, pride shining in his eyes. That evening, as Angela and David returned home, they found themselves inundated with messages of support. People from all walks of life reached out. Activists, community leaders, even former police officers who had witnessed injustice within the system and wanted to help. But not all the responses were positive. Threatening messages began trickling in, some anonymous, others from those who felt the movement was an attack on law enforcement. David's protective instincts kicked into high gear, and he made arrangements for added security at their home. Despite the challenges, Angela remained resolute. She spent the evening drafting emails, coordinating with Carla and other activists, and preparing for the days ahead. As she finally settled into bed, exhaustion weighing heavily on her, Angela realized something profound. This fight wasn't just about her rights or her dignity. It was about giving a voice to the voiceless, about building a better future for everyone. And she was ready for it. The pressure mounts. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Angela and David Rivers' home, illuminating the stacks of papers, laptops, and sticky notes that had transformed their dining room into an impromptu command center. The past few days had been a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and media appearances. Angela sat at the head of the table, her laptop open as she sifted through emails. Each one carried either a message of support, a plea for help, or a critique of the movement that had grown around her. David entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one in front of Angela, who glanced up at him with a grateful smile. "You're a lifesaver," she said, taking the sip. "You're going to need it," David replied, sitting beside her. "Today's schedule is packed. 2 interviews, a strategy meeting with Carla, and a community town hall this evening. Are you holding up?" Angela leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "I'm fine, just tired. This is bigger than I ever imagined, David. People are looking to us for answers, for leadership. It's overwhelming." David reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. "You don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, remember? And you've got a whole community rallying behind you." Angela nodded, drawing strength from his words. "You're right. Let's get to it." The first interview of the day was with a prominent national news network. Angela and David sat side by side in their living room, the camera crew setting up around them. The anchor, a sharp-eyed woman named Serena Clark, adjusted her microphone before smiling warmly at them. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us today," Serena began as the cameras rolled. Angela, your story has captivated the nation. Millions have seen the footage of your encounter with the police. How are you processing everything that's happened since then? Angela took a deep breath before answering. It's been a lot to take in. I never imagined I'd find myself at the center of something like this. But this isn't just about me. It's about a larger issue, a system that allows these kinds of injustices to happen every day to people who don't have a platform to speak out. Serena nodded. You've called for specific reforms, including mandatory de-escalation training and independent oversight committees. What do you hope these changes will achieve? I hope they'll rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, Angela replied. Right now, that trust is broken. People need to know that when they're stopped by an officer, they'll be treated with dignity and respect, not suspicion and hostility. David chimed in, his voice steady and authoritative. As a former Marine and a police chief, I've seen firsthand the importance of accountability. This isn't about vilifying law enforcement. It's about making the system better for everyone. Officers need the training and resources to do their jobs effectively and fairly, and communities need to feel protected, not targeted. The interview continued, with Angela and David answering questions about their experiences, their goals, and the challenges they faced. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, Angela felt a sense of accomplishment. She had spoken her truth, and she hoped it would resonate with those watching. Later that afternoon, Angela and Carla sat in a bustling cafe downtown, poring over notes for the evening's town hall. The cafe hummed with the sound of conversations and clinking cups, but Angela's focus was unwavering. This town hall is critical, Carla said, tapping her pen against the table. It's your chance to connect with the community face to face. They need to see that you're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for them. I know, Angela replied. I just want to make sure I'm prepared. People are going to have questions, and not all of them will be friendly. Carla smiled. You've got this, Angela. Just speak from the heart, like you always do. As they finalized their talking points, a man approached their table hesitantly. Excuse me, Mrs. Rivers, he said, his voice low. Angela looked up, surprised. Yes. I just wanted to say thank you, the man said, his eyes earnest. What you're doing, it means a lot. My brother had a run-in with the police last year, and it didn't end well. Seeing you stand up for people like him gives me hope. Angela's throat tightened with emotion. She reached out to shake his hand. Thank you for sharing that. It's people like your brother who inspire me to keep going. The man nodded, his expression grateful, before walking away. Angela watched him go, her resolve strengthening. That evening, the town hall was held at a local community center. The room was packed, with people spilling out into the hallway. Angela stood at the front of the room, flanked by David and Carla. A microphone was set up for attendees to ask questions, and a projector displayed slides outlining the proposed reforms. Angela stepped up to the podium, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces before her. Good evening, she began. Thank you all for being here. This is a difficult conversation, but it's a necessary one. We're here tonight to talk about how we can create a system that works for everyone. A system that's fair, just, and accountable. The audience erupted into applause, but Angela quickly held up a hand. I want to be clear. This isn't about blaming individual officers. It's about addressing the systemic issues that allow these injustices to happen. It's about creating a culture of respect and accountability. As Angela continued, she spoke about her experience, the reforms she was advocating for, and the importance of community involvement. When she finished, the room broke into applause once again. The question and answer session that followed was intense. Some attendees expressed anger and frustration, while others shared personal stories of encounters with law enforcement. A few pushed back, questioning whether the proposed reforms were feasible or fair. Angela listened to each speaker carefully, responding with patience and empathy. She didn't have all the answers, but she made it clear that she was committed to finding them. By the time the town hall ended, Angela was exhausted but hopeful. The discussions had been challenging, but they were also necessary. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had to start somewhere. As Angela and David drove home that night, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Angela leaned her head against the window, her thoughts racing. "You were incredible tonight," David said, breaking the silence. Angela turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, but we got a long road ahead." "We'll walk it together," David replied firmly. Angela nodded, her determination unwavering. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or mistreated, and she wasn't about to back down. A movement takes shape. The days following the town hall were a blur of activity. Angela Rivers found herself at the epicenter of a growing movement, one that had taken on a life of its own. Calls, emails, and messages flooded in from every corner of the country. People sharing their stories, offering support, and asking how they could help. What had started as a personal fight for justice was quickly transforming into a national reckoning. Angela sat at the dining table, now a permanent workspace littered with legal pads, half-empty coffee mugs, and printed documents. Carla Diaz sat across from her, her laptop open, and a planner spread out beside it. "We've got the rally tomorrow at City Hall," Carla said, flipping through her notes. "It's shaping up to be massive. Local unions, activists, and even a few city council members have confirmed they'll be there." "This is the moment, Angela." Angela nodded, though her face betrayed her exhaustion. "It's incredible how much this has grown. But it's also terrifying. What if we can't deliver on these expectations?" Carla leaned forward, her expression fierce. "You're not alone in this. People aren't just looking to you. They're looking to all of us. This is bigger than any one person." Angela took a deep breath, letting Carla's words sink in. She glanced toward the living room, where David was on another call, his voice steady and commanding. His support had been unwavering, and Angela knew she couldn't have made it this far without him. The next day dawned bright and clear, the perfect backdrop for the rally that had been weeks in the making. Angela and David arrived at City Hall to find a sea of people already gathered, holding signs with messages like "Accountability now" and "Justice for all." The energy in the air was electric, a mix of anger, hope, and determination. Angela felt a lump rise in her throat as she took in the sheer size of the crowd. She had known the rally would be big, but seeing thousands of people gathered in solidarity was overwhelming. "You ready?" David asked, his voice low. Angela nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "As ready as I'll ever be." Carla appeared at their side, holding a clipboard and wearing a headset. "We're about to start. You're up first, Angela. Just speak from the heart." Angela made her way to the stage, her heart pounding. The crowd erupted into cheers as she approached the microphone. She took a moment to steady herself, then began to speak. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying across the plaza. "Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for standing with me, and for standing with everyone who has ever been silenced, mistreated, or overlooked." The crowd roared in response, and Angela felt a surge of confidence. "This movement isn't about one person or one incident," she continued. "It's about creating a system that values fairness, accountability, and respect for every individual. It's about ensuring that no one has to experience what I did, what so many others have experienced without the chance to tell their story." She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "But this isn't just about calling out the problems. It's about finding solutions. We're here to demand change, and to work for it. Together, we can create a better future, a future where justice is not just a word, but a reality." The crowd erupted into applause, and Angela stepped back, letting Carla and other speakers take the stage. As she watched, she felt a sense of pride and hope she hadn't felt in weeks. The rally was just the beginning. Over the following days, Angela and Carla worked tirelessly to turn the momentum into action. Meetings with city officials, police department leaders, and community organizations became a regular part of Angela's schedule. Each step forward felt like a small victory, but Angela knew the road ahead was long. One evening, Angela and David sat on their porch, the sun setting behind the trees. It was one of the rare moments they had to themselves, away from the constant demands of the movement. "You've been amazing through all of this," Angela said, leaning her head on David's shoulder. David chuckled softly. "I could say the same about you. You've turned something terrible into something powerful." Angela sighed, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I just hope it lasts. Movements like this can burn out if we're not careful." David placed a hand over hers. "It'll last, because you won't let it fade, and neither will the people standing with you." The weeks turned into months, and the movement continued to grow. The reforms Angela had called for began to take shape. Mandatory de-escalation training programs were implemented, an independent oversight committee was established, and a comprehensive review of traffic stop protocols was underway. Angela also became a frequent speaker at events and conferences, using her platform to advocate for systemic change. She worked with activists, legal experts, and community leaders to push for policies that would make a lasting impact. Despite the progress, there were challenges. Critics accused Angela of being anti-police, and some local leaders resisted the proposed reforms. But Angela faced each obstacle with unwavering determination, bolstered by the support of David, Carla, and the countless people who believed in her cause. One evening, Angela found herself alone in her home office, going through a stack of letters from people who had written to her. One letter, in particular, caught her eye. It was from a young woman named Marisol, who shared her story of losing a family member in a police encounter gone wrong. Marisol's words were raw and heartfelt, and Angela felt tears welling up as she read. At the bottom of the letter, Marisol had written, "Thank you for giving us hope, for making us believe that change is possible." Angela folded the letter carefully, her resolve hardening. This was why she had taken on this fight, not for recognition or accolades, but for people like Marisol who deserved a better future. She turned to her laptop and began drafting her next speech, her mind racing with ideas. The work was far from over, but Angela was ready for it. Because change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable, and she was determined to see it through. As the months turned into a year, Angela Rivers became more than a name or a face. She became a symbol of resilience and determination. What had started as a moment of personal injustice had blossomed into a full-blown movement for systemic change. Her work had reached beyond Kansas City, drawing the attention of national policymakers, activists, and everyday citizens who wanted to see their communities improve. Angela was sitting in a packed auditorium at a regional policing summit, where she had been invited to deliver the keynote speech. The room was filled with police chiefs, legislators, community leaders, and activists from across the country. David sat in the front row, his presence a quiet but powerful support. When Angela took the stage, the room erupted into applause. She stood tall, her posture exuding confidence she had earned through countless trials. She took a deep breath and began. *********************************************************************************************************************10 I was standing on the side of a dark road, scared, humiliated, and unsure of what would happen next. What I didn't realize in that moment was that the fear and anger I felt would become fuel, not just for me, but for so many others who were tired of being treated as less than human. Today, I stand here not just as someone who experienced injustice, but as someone who has seen firsthand what can happen when people come together to demand better. Change isn't easy. It's slow, it's frustrating, and it's often met with resistance. But change is also necessary, and it's possible. In Kansas City, we've seen how change can take root. De-escalation training is now mandatory for all officers, reducing incidents of unnecessary force by over 40%. An independent oversight committee is holding our police department accountable, giving the community a voice in how they're protected and served. These are not just policies, they are steps toward rebuilding trust. But we still have so far to go. Across this country, too many people still live in fear of those who are sworn to protect them. Too many officers still lack the training and resources to do their jobs effectively and compassionately. And too many leaders are still hesitant to confront the systems that perpetuate these problems. So, my challenge to you today is simple. Don't stop. Don't stop asking questions. Don't stop pushing for better policies. And don't stop holding yourselves and each other accountable. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about building bridges. It's about creating a system where everyone, officers and citizens alike, can feel safe, respected, and valued. And most importantly, it's about hope. Hope that we can leave behind something better for our children. Hope that we can prove, through our actions, that justice is not just an ideal, but a reality we can achieve together. Thank you. Asterisk, asterisk. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Angela wasn't looking for validation. She was already thinking about the next steps, how to expand the reforms, how to engage more voices, how to ensure the movement didn't lose momentum. As the summit wrapped up, Angela and David stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The horizon was painted with hues of orange and purple, and for a moment, they stood in silence, taking it all in. "You were incredible," David said, breaking the quiet. "That speech, it's going to resonate with a lot of people." Angela turned to him, her expression both proud and humble. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, David. You've been my anchor through all of it." David smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And you've been my inspiration. Watching you fight for what's right, it's reminded me why I chose this path in the first place." They walked together, the weight of the day lifting slightly as they leaned on each other. Angela knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. She had David, Carla, and an ever-growing community of people who believed in the cause. 1 year later, the Kansas City skyline had become a symbol of transformation. The reforms Angela had championed were being adopted in cities across the nation. Police departments were consulting her and David for advice on implementing similar measures. Angela had even been invited to testify before Congress, advocating for federal legislation that would establish oversight committees and mandatory training nationwide. At home, Angela and David hosted a small celebration with Carla and other close allies. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and stories of progress. As the night wound down, Carla raised her glass. To Angela and David, she said, her voice filled with emotion, "You didn't just fight for change. You showed us all that it's possible. Here's to everything we've achieved and everything we're still going to accomplish." The group cheered, clinking their glasses together. Angela felt a swell of gratitude as she looked around the room. These were the people who had stood by her when the fight seemed impossible. They had turned pain into purpose, and together, they had made an undeniable impact. Later that night, Angela stood on her porch, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The stars were bright, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of crickets. David joined her, a steaming mug of tea in his hands. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, handing her the mug. Angela smiled softly. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, and how much further we have to go. But for the first time, I don't feel overwhelmed. I feel ready." David nodded. "That's because you've built something that will last. You've shown people what's possible, and that's not something anyone can take away." Angela leaned against him, the warmth of his presence wrapping around her like a blanket. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to relax, to savor the moment. The fight wasn't over, but Angela Rivers was ready for whatever came next. Together, with David and a nation inspired by their journey, she knew they would continue to push forward, proving that justice, accountability, and hope could prevail, even in the face of adversity. And that was a legacy worth fighting for.